ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Hi News Daily fans, I'm Erin Park, host of the new podcast series Expanse, Nowhere Man. I've been on a mission to try to understand why in 1999, American man Robert Baguki plunged into the Great Sandy Desert on a spiritual quest. But it's looking like I'm going to have to go to the freezing heart of Alaska to find answers.
Oh my God.
To come with me on this strange journey, search Expanse on the ABC Listen app.
Oh my gosh.
Earlier this week, 5 Al Jazeera journalists were killed in an Israeli strike in Gaza. Israel confirmed it had targeted one of the men it says was the head of a Hamas terrorist cell. His employer denies that. So who's telling the truth? Today, former Al Jazeera journalist and executive director of the Alliance for Journalists Freedom, Peter Greste, on the problems that arise when foreign reporters are blocked from covering a war. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily.
This is Al Jazeera breaking news just coming out. Sad breaking news out of Gaza, where Al Jazeera journalist Anas al-Sharif has just been killed in what appears to be a targeted Israeli strike. Anas was killed after a tent for journalists was hit outside the main gate of the hospital. The 28-year-old was a key source of news from Gaza City and the north for international audiences since Israel's war on the Strip began some 22 months ago.
Peter, in Gaza on Monday, there was a funeral procession for 5 journalists. One of them was Anas al-Sharif. Just tell me about him. Who was he?
Anas was one of the most prominent, most recognisable Palestinian journalists and videographers. He was working for Al Jazeera Arabic. He was a 28-year-old journalist, married, he had 2 kids. He was part of a Reuters team that won a Pulitzer Prize for breaking news photography. Clearly someone who had a very high profile, but he was also accused by the Israelis of being associated with Hamas.
Israel says it deliberately targeted their tent and have accused one of the correspondents, Anas al-Sharif, of belonging to Hamas. The UN, the Al Jazeera Network and the Committee to Protect Journalists have condemned the attack and rejected the accusation, saying there is no credible evidence of this.
Yeah, the Israeli military says that Anas al-Sharif was a Hamas operative who'd previously actually launched rockets at Israel. That's their claim.
That is their claim. We haven't seen any evidence to substantiate that. The Israelis have shown documents that claim to show some kind of connection between Anas and Hamas. Those documents certainly don't support the claim that he was an active member of Hamas. But there are a couple of points I think I really need to make. The first is that any journalist working in a place like Gaza is going to have a relationship with the power that controls a region like that. You can't avoid it. I mean, you're going to have their numbers in your contacts books. You're going to have a record of phone calls to them, of communications with them. You're going to have meetings with them, and particularly when they are the power that controls movement in a place like Gaza. So you're inevitably going to have a close working relationship with them. That doesn't make you an active member.
Yes.
And we haven't seen any evidence from the Israelis that he was actively involved in terrorist operations. It seems highly circumstantial at best. And even if he was in some way involved with Hamas, that is not the justification for a bombing, a targeted killing like this.
He'd even written Anas his own obituary, his own will, I suppose, if you like, fearing that he would be killed, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And that was after the Israeli authorities had already accused him of being associated with Hamas. He knew that there was a very good chance that he would be targeted. It seems that he was right in that regard. I guess the thing is that whatever the Israelis say about Anas in particular, there is a really disturbing pattern of attacks, of strikes against working journalists. There have been bomb attacks on the homes of journalists. There have been attacks on journalists who've been working with clearly marked body armour and in clearly marked vehicles. The Israelis have always accused them of being involved in terrorism in some form. And we don't have any specific evidence. The Israelis have never produced any clear-cut evidence to substantiate those allegations. The Israelis, of course, always deny that they target journalists, always deny that they target civilians. But what we have is a clear pattern of circumstantial evidence that at the very least demands independent investigation, an independent inquiry to get to the bottom of the matter, because it is very difficult from the outside to look at that circumstantial evidence and to agree that the Israelis are in fact simply operating to attack and kill terrorists.
Well, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, in the 22 months of the war, more than 180 Palestinian journalists have actually been killed.
That's a huge number. And again, to be clear, the CPJ's numbers are very, very conservative. Other press freedom organisations put the number at far higher. But regardless of how you do the maths, again, it's hard to escape the conclusion that the Israelis are targeting journalists.
All right, well, Peter, of course, you worked for Al Jazeera leading up to your imprisonment in Egypt. It does so much good journalism, we know that, right around the world, but Israel accuses it of being the mouthpiece of Hamas, and it actually banned the network operating in Israel last year. What do we know about the network's perspective, particularly within the Middle East?
Look, I've never seen anything to suggest that Al Jazeera, I certainly, while I was working with them, never saw anything to suggest that the network has a policy of supporting Hamas or Islamist organisations. But having said that, you've got to remember that any news organisation tends to view the world through the lens of the place where its headquarters is. The ABC sees and understands and interprets the world through an Australian-centric view. The same with the BBC, the same with CNN and the New York Times. They all see the world from the perspective of the country that they're anchored in, and that is the case with Al Jazeera, which understands and interprets the world from Qatar. Now, Al Jazeera also has a really extensive network of correspondents across the Middle East in particular. They've got very strong relationships with groups all over Gaza. And so inevitably it is going to be taking a view from inside Gaza. And remember too that if you're a Palestinian, you're sitting at the sharp end of the Israeli attacks over the past couple of years, you're also going to see and report on the effects of those attacks from a position that's incredibly sympathetic to the people that you're working with. That's just a function of perspective. It does not invalidate the truth of what they're reporting. It does not make them propagandists for Hamas. It simply makes them reporters who are covering the story on the ground as they see and experience it. There are going to be critics, and Israel and a lot of Israeli supporters will accuse them of being involved in promoting Hamas propaganda. But I think that's a pretty long bow to draw, particularly when it seems as though anybody who is creating a narrative that runs counter to the Israeli view of things has been accused of being propagandists or supporters of Hamas in some way.
Well, Peter, as we know, the only journalists who are able to cover the war on the ground in Gaza are Palestinian, that is, the people that are actually living there, because Israel has barred foreign journalists from entering Gaza. That helps Israel, does it, control the narrative? Is that why it does it?
Well, yeah, it's certainly hard to come to any other conclusion. The Israelis, as you said, have repeatedly refused to let foreign journalists in. And just to be clear, I'm one of the earliest signatories on a petition by almost 1,000 international journalists demanding access for foreign correspondents into Gaza. That's not because we want to diminish the work of the Palestinians or somehow claim that they are inherently biased. But the only way we're going to get information that people we'll be able to trust, that we'll be able to see as independent of either the Palestinians or Hamas or the Israelis, is if we are able to get foreign correspondents into Gaza working independently as witnesses and reporters. Now, the Israelis, as you said, have repeatedly refused that. They say it's because they can't give security guarantees to the foreign correspondents, but it also does seem very much to be about controlling the flow of information and the reporting that comes out of there.
So without international journalists on the ground, as you say, it does allow doubts to be raised about the legitimacy of the images and the reporting that emerges from there. Peter, we saw that most recently, I guess, with this case with the New York Times, where it published a photo of an emaciated child with its mother, which Israel then claimed was fake. Just tell me about that. The New York Times did have to clarify that image.
That's right. They said that the image was in fact of a child with a pre-existing condition that was exacerbated by hunger, by starvation. And I think that underlines the central point, that it's incredibly difficult for news organisations like Al Jazeera and the New York Times, the BBC or even the ABC, to report accurately on what's going on there without having people on the ground who are capable of verifying and following up those sorts of images and those sorts of details.
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu this week accused the international press of having bought Hamas's propaganda hook, line and sinker.
Everything that I told you could be verified easily, but it hasn't. And the international press has bought hook, line and sinker Hamas statistics, Hamas claims, Hamas forgeries, and Hamas photographs. For example,
he's threatening to sue the New York Times, although the paper does stick by its reporting. It does defend its reporting.
I'm looking right now into the possibility of a governmental suit against the New York Times because this is outrageous. It's the kind of malignant lies that were leveled at the Jewish people in the Middle Ages we won't suffer. We won't allow it to go unchallenged, and this is the purpose of this press conference.
Yeah, and again, the answer would be simply for the Israelis to allow foreign journalists into Gaza to work alongside the Palestinians, to be able to report freely and unhindered. And that's the easiest way of resolving this crisis.
Just tell me how it works now, though. How do media outlets like the New York Times or the ABC, for that matter, verify the images that are actually coming out from the journalists on the ground in Gaza? How can they be certain of the veracity of the information or the images that are being provided?
There's a whole host of tools that news organisations will use. They'll use the metadata associated with the images to confirm locations and times of particular shots. They'll also use other clues in the photographs that can confirm the time and location of the shots, position of the sun, shadows, other details in the background of the photographs and so on. And they can generally do a pretty good job, but that kind of verification, as I said, is never going to be a substitute for being there on the ground and being able to take the photographs yourself.
Well, Peter, as an international correspondent or a former correspondent yourself, you have covered a number of conflicts. The work is vital, though as you found, of course, when you were jailed in Egypt and at other times, it can be incredibly dangerous, can't it?
Yes, and I've not only been in prison myself, but I've also lost friends and colleagues in covering these kinds of conflicts. Journalists who go there know and understand the risks that they're taking. The journalists that are covering these places are highly trained, often highly experienced, and they know full well what is at stake. You've got to let the journalists themselves make informed choices about whether or not they're willing to go, and if they are willing to go, then they need to be given the freedom to do it.
And history shows us how important that is, right? From Vietnam to Iraq and beyond.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen reporting change the way that governments respond to conflicts. We saw the way that the public turned against the Vietnam War over time because of the reporting. We've seen the way that the public has turned against the wars in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. That only comes from good reporting. Sometimes the governments don't always like it, but that's a part of the way that democracy works.
All right. Well, Peter, as you mentioned, News organisations and journalists across the world, including the ABC, are calling on Israel to allow journalists to move in and out of Gaza to report from there. How important is that at this particular point now?
Look, I think it's increasingly vital. We've got claims and counterclaims about the levels of starvation and malnutrition that are taking place inside Gaza. As you've mentioned earlier, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, has repeatedly accused the foreign press of swallowing Hamas propaganda hook, line and sinker. The only way we can get to the truth of the matter is by having independent eyes and ears on the ground in Gaza reporting what they see is taking place. Palestinian journalists are doing incredible work, but they will always be seen as vulnerable to allegations that they are working as Hamas propagandists and not independent eyewitnesses. It's unfortunate, but foreign correspondents are the only ones capable of doing that.
Peter Greste is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Journalists Freedom and a Professor of Journalism at Macquarie University. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed. Audio production by Sam Dunn. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. Thanks for listening.